This is my Parsha video blog for Parshas Vayeitzei. 2 weeks ago, in honor of Parshas Chayei, the blogosphere held its second annual Silly Tumult over the question of how old Rivka was when Yitzchak betrothed and subsequently married her. A related interesting issue is how old Rachel and Leah were when they married Yaakov. And there's a nice medrash in that regard. I think I saw it in Vayeitzei by Rosh Hadarshan. This midrash asks why Yaakov waited 14 years learning in Yeshiva Shem Be'ever. We have to digress briefly. There's a midrash that Yaakov learned for 14 years in Yeshiva Shem Be'ever after Yitzchak sent him out to get married. So he waited 14 years before arriving in Haran. Just the basic problem that sparked that midrash, they lived in the Yeshiva Shem Be'ever for 14 years, is chronological. Various psukim give hard dates for various events, though these hard dates are subject to some interpretation. But working within these constraints, we fit in various events, and based on these constraints, there seems to be a gap of 14 years. So once these 14 years existed, they plugged in the idea that he was learning 14 years in Shem Be'ever, and various other midrashim fleshed this out in various ways. For example, in the beginning of Vayeitzei, it says by the dream, at the end of the dream, Vayikas Yaakov Mishnatau. There's actually a dagesh in the shin, so it's Mishnatau, from his sleep, but we can interpret it as Mishnatau, or you could just read it as Mishnatau, his Mishnah, his learning. There are various midrashim that say that he didn't sleep all 14 years that he was learning. This was the first time that he actually had to sleep. And various other midrashim flesh out this whole Shem Be'ever bit. But this midrash, which I think was in Bereishis Rabasi, asks why Yaakov chose to wait. After all, if you look in Bereishis Chavches, we see that his father told him in the beginning of it, Vayikra Yitzchak el Yaakov, Vevarech oso, Vayitzavehu, he commanded him, Vayomer lo, Lo sikach Ishem Yivnos Canaan, you shouldn't take a wife of the daughters of Canaan. Kum lech Padan Aram, you should go to Padan Aram, Beis Besuel Avimecha, to the house of Besuel, your mother's father, sorry. And take for yourself a wife from the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. Etc. So Hashem should bless you, etc. But he gave him this command to go get married. So how come he didn't get married immediately? Shouldn't he be Zariz? The reason that even lists us. So this midrash answers that his father told him, if you look carefully, he says, you should take from there a wife from the daughters of Laban, your mother's brother. So Yaakov set out to do so, says this midrash, but then he heard that Laban didn't have any daughters, so he couldn't marry them. So there was no reason to go right then, but trusting Hashem, he stayed in the Yeshiva of Shem Be'ever for 14 years, which was time enough for Laban's wife to get pregnant and give birth to Rachel and Leah, and then for them to grow old enough to marry. So in other words, 1 year for her to have her pregnancy, and then he had an additional 13 years. And then it would be possible to marry them. Of course, he didn't immediately marry them, but he had to work for several years afterwards. They were probably around 20 at the time of marriage. Now, there's many influences on the midrash. First of all, there's this whole 14-year issue with the gap, and also a desire to flesh out Yaakov's motivation for waiting. But there's a comparison and a contrast that we could make with Rivka, because we see a similar type of situation with Rivka, where she had just been born almost when Eliezer was sent down to bring her. Rivka, according to a midrashic/pashtanik accounting made popular by Rashi, was 3 years old. And this is, again, due to constraints. It's in large part based on the fact that we're told, immediately after Akedas Yitzchak, we're told that Avram was told of her birth right after the Akedah. So we assume, based on these two things, first of all, we assume that right after the Akedah was the time when Avraham was told this. It's not actually clear that Avraham was told that there, because this is more of a framework type of issue describing the generations of people, and so these intersperse with one another, not necessarily in exact chronological order. So it could have been that he was told beforehand, or it could be he was told much later. But the juxtaposition, we assume that he was told immediately thereafter. And we're also we assume that she had just been born right after the Akedah. Based on other calculations, Yitzchak was 37 at the time of the Akedah, and so we know from a pasuk it says explicitly that he was 30 when Rivka came back. So she must have been 3 based on this calculation. This is where the whole blogosphere goes into this whole silly tumult about whatever. We're not going to get into that. But part of the theme of this midrash, thematically, what's inspiring it? Besides the fact that you're analyzing psukim, but part of the theme is that right after the Akedah, which if you look in the Akedah, Avram's promised continuity, and he's going to have many nations, and he's going to have Klal Yisrael. So Avram's promised continuity is 3 Yisrael, and immediately thereafter he's told by some messenger or something that Rivka was born. That's the impression that you get is that Rivka and Yitzchak were made for each other. And thus it's only now that Rivka is born, she was made just for him. Now, by saying, in Bereshit Rabasi, by saying that Rachel and Leah are to be born now that Yaakov must marry somebody, is to say similarly that there's this idea of them being created just for him, for it's a match made in heaven. This theme of match made in heaven was stressed by Rivka, besides by that juxtaposition, but also by having Eliezer make this nichush, make this test to try to determine who was the fated wife, and having Rivka come out as well just when he declared this test. And then later on having her family say that this was the will of Hashem, that they couldn't go even small to deviate because this is clearly the will of God. And the parallels exist also in the case of Rachel, because when Yaakov first arrives, he asks people where her family is. And suddenly, just then, they say, well, here is Rachel coming, and that's why he's so excited, and he gives her a kiss, etc. And so she came out just to water the sheep, and that's also stressing that this is a match made in heaven. So this midrash that Rachel and Leah were born just afterwards is within that theme.